now. Might go gray for a second. All right. So, yes, responsive design, you should be able to see that. And let's get this party started. I will be tweeting out these slides very soon. In fact, yeah, it's very, very soon. So you will have them in your hands. But we're talking about responsive design in Dreamweaver CC along the lines of fluid grid layout and everything it has to offer. So presented by me. Hopefully you're not sick of hearing from me, guys. I did present last week and now this week as well. So apologies if you're sick of hearing my voice. I don't know what to tell you. I can't really change it. I wish it was deeper myself. All right. So that is my Twitter handle, and like I said, I'll send out the slides and resources after the call today. But let's get this started, because we're going to talk about responsive design, which I don't need to read this boring text to you, but basically we just want to make sure our content is crafted and works across various screens, okay, with a minimum of resizing, panning, and scrolling and all that good stuff. So we want to make it easy on the users, but we don't want to have to design multiple sites, okay? So we just don't want to have an m.paultrani.com. I don't need 2 sites. I'd like to have one because it's going to be easier on me, but I don't necessarily want them to look exactly the same. So that's the idea. It's like one size across one site across multiple screens. Make it look sexy regardless of what sort of device they're on, okay? And there are a couple of different examples of this. So I'm going to encourage you guys to check out some of these, like, my site, for instance. Here's one. Again, this is just sort of my example. Let me just minimize some of my screens so this is effective for you to see. But in general, your content could be viewed on this sort of screen, on a desktop basically, or something smaller. Let me close that background window. Scaling it down further, something smaller like a laptop of various sizes, always getting smaller, and maybe not a laptop at all, maybe a tablet device. A tablet, yeah, that's what I said, but it could also be sideways. So how do we make sure our content works there? And it could even be viewed on a phone, okay? That's what I think when I see this, because I'm like, oh, great. I will send out this link right now by Twitter. So responsive design. And making sure it works effectively, making sure it targets all these different screen sizes. So there's lots of examples of that. That's my example. I've done others, and they're on my website on paultrani.com. But it's not all about me, because there's plenty of cool examples on Media Queries. That's mediaquery.es, okay? That's the site. And again, I'll send out this presentation later, but here's one from that site. And I like how when I scale down my presentation, it'll go from smaller characters to down to 4 characters, down site, so I can scroll through that content. So I thought that was a really cool example that you could find on mediaquery.es. Okay, so I want my content to respond like this. Anderson-wise, scaling down, you can see it's like the typical 2-column, and I can scroll down and see some of that additional content. Oops, sorry. But it goes from 2 columns down to 1 column. Really straightforward, and I need to do that at least. Another example, forefathers, again, going from scaling it up further. Looks pretty good. Even if it was on a large desktop, I think it actually formats a little differently if I could get this screen larger. So you might have some cool examples that you know of or that you use. It's gotten so popular these days that even the BBC has launched their own responsivenews.co.uk. Okay, so this is sort of their developer blog, if you will, where they're talking about responsive design. Okay, so check that out. I don't know if it's trying to detect. Maybe it would detect if I'm on a mobile device. I don't know. But my first glance at this site was maybe it's not responsive, which if it's not, that's kind of embarrassing. So I don't want to jump to conclusions because I'd be surprised if it wasn't responsive. But this is doing some, it's probably doing some responsive or screen detection is what they're trying to do, some screen detection that's not done necessarily with media queries, okay? So responsive news is out there. Just giving you guys some resources, by the way. All right, and feel free to ask questions by the chat, well, actually by take a look as well. And Brian, I don't know if you're curious about how it's doing, my slides are doing that transition. That page roll might be the transitions that you're talking about. And that's reveal. That's a reveal. If you do reveal presentation, just do a search on reveal CSS, and you'll see it's actually a template. It's a presentation template all made in HTML. Okay, so you download that, and you can also pick apart this link when I post it as well. So, and Steve does say the responsivenews.co.uk is responsive on iPhone, which is good to hear. All right, so that's cool. But you should check the URL because I think it might even default to m.responsive.co.uk. So, all right, so let's move on. There are resources for testing responsive sites that we can talk about, responsive design. But let's get into what it is. So it's like some things to consider in general. It's like, you know, what do I need to consider when I do this? Well, it's like time and money, which isn't everything time and money. Browser support, what browsers are supported when it comes to responsive design. Performance, okay, so am I trying to download pushing all the images to a phone, even though I'm only showing a couple of them. Okay, well, that might not be effective. Or high DPI images versus, say, low-res images. All right, so those are performance issues come into play. Content, a lot of times your content should be based, or your responsive design should be based around your content. So I'm going to actually worry less about the different Android screen sizes or iPhone or iPad necessarily, and I'm going to be concerned about where my content really starts to break down and look ugly, okay? One resource, if you don't mind me mentioning, since Steve did ask, or actually somebody asked about responsive, testing your content on responsive sites and resources, I think one is to search for my buddies Piotr Walszyn, as an evangelist that I work with, and he created a Chrome extension called Responsive Inspector. Plugin for Chrome. I don't really have time to show it, okay, because I don't want to get sidetracked, but it's an amazing plugin that allows me to pick apart and really test my content. I can go to the responsive news.co.uk and pick apart all of their media queries using this responsive inspector plugin. All right, so go ahead and check that out. That's really awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Just quickly, again, I'm going to move on. I see Ben talking about, he understands what responsive design is. Let's get into Dreamweaver, but I do want to start to look at all this stuff. It's like I should think about the devices that I'm targeting, the context that it's in divided by the context equals your result. So basically it comes down to converting a lot of your content to percentages. So you're getting into responsive design. One of the easiest things you could do is start to convert some of your hard-coded positioned things into something more flexible using percentages. So, and again, make it compatible. Sure, we'll do that. Hey, you know, there's examples out there. There's media queries that I can go over, but it's nice that Dreamweaver does all of this, okay? And Dreamweaver does all of this. We have an example for that. And it does all of this using the fluid grid layout, okay? And there's some other tools as well. All right. I don't want to forget to talk about other technologies and developments in the web world, though, by the way. But again, to Brian's point, I want to make sure I'm focusing on Dreamweaver, which really we're just hitting this first bullet point, the fluid grid layout. All right, but we'll move from there, but we are talking about Dreamweaver. So let's get into this. To Brian's point, let's just dive right in, guys, shall we? All right. Jumping into Dreamweaver. Dreamweaver CC is what I have. Little secret for you guys. We actually updated Dreamweaver, the fluid grid layout capabilities, I think the end of last year or beginning of this year. So this has actually been available by an update for Creative Cloud users. So even though you're using Dreamweaver CS6, if you hit the update button, you would have these capabilities, okay? But obviously I've downloaded Dreamweaver CS6, or CC. And Mike, there's plenty of differences between Dreamweaver CS6 and Dreamweaver CC, but Dreamweaver CS6, if you were a Creative Cloud member, we released updates to Dreamweaver CS6. So it's kind of like it was like half Dreamweaver CS6 and had functionality of Dreamweaver CC, okay? And that's the power of Creative Cloud. It's like, especially when it comes to the web world, we don't have to sit on all of these features and functionality. We've been rolling out these features to Dreamweaver CS6 users if you're a Creative Cloud member, okay? And thank you, Paran, for posting that link as well. All right, so let's get into it. So here I am in Dreamweaver, and let me just switch back over. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, New, and I'm going to jump into Fluid Grid Layout. And you can see initially it's a matter of just fill in the blank. Okay, so we have mobile, gives me 4 columns. So I'm glad we turned these to gray. 8 columns for tablet and 12 for desktop. And I can always jump in and change this content, obviously. You guys know how to do that. But I want to use a grid-based view to design my content, okay, these columns, this column view, okay? So basically organizing everything along a grid, which is good to do from a design standpoint, period. Okay, you have the column width, and then how far from edge to edge does it go? You know, sort of what is the buffer on either side? 91 was kind of weird there. So I might go 90%, 95% edge to edge, and then maybe 100% if I want to, or vice versa. Take this like that. 100% for mobile, go edge to edge, 95% for tablet, 90% for desktop. Okay, and you can also reset the defaults, okay? But in general, I'm just going to hit Create. And I'm going to create this CSS file. In fact, I'm not really creating it. Dreamweaver is doing all the work. It sets it up for me, and I'll show you what it's setting up. I'm going to hit Save. And then I'm just going to save this page as index. Okay, so I'm going to save everything, because what happens, Dreamweaver does a couple things. It makes the grid CSS file, and then includes boilerplate as well as respond min.js. Okay, so these are basically two dependent files that help my content work, especially in older browsers, is what respond min does. And boilerplate makes, sort of gives you that grid-based view, the columns and everything, okay? So two files that I didn't have to create. All I have to do is hit OK. In fact, I can be right here in Design View and start to work. And yes, so this presentation will be archived. So it is being recorded right now, which is great. But that's all you really need to do, guys. I encourage you to go File, New, and then just create a new fluid grid layout and just start messing around. But a couple of things you need to keep in mind, because it defaults to the mobile view. So if I take a look right down here in the lower right, it shows me that the mobile size, I'm in the mobile layout, okay? So hopefully that's coming across. Connect, I know it's a small button. I can click on tablet size. It gives me the tablet size and then gives me the desktop size. So that's what I need to know by default. Something that screwed me up in when we updated Dreamweaver is this little button right up here. There's this switch to fluid grid view. Okay, so I actually had that turned off, and what does it do? It turns off all those grid lines. And I thought I broke something. So I was like, where are my lines? How do I control this? Well, just turn on this switch to grid view is all you need to do. All right, and you can obviously see we have our 4 columns, we have our 8 columns, we have our 12 columns. So. And so here's some obvious things that we see. We see the mobile size is 480 by 800. And then we have this tablet size, 768 by 1024. And then beyond, say, 1,000 pixels wide. Okay. And some people are asking, what happens if I rotate it in landscape view? What happens if I want to target a different size? What can I do there? Well, without getting into too much detail just yet, know that if you ever want to target, say, a different landscape, use your CSS designer panel, select the CSS, and this second grouping is the @media. These are your media queries. So I can hit that plus button, and then right in here, let's quit out of old Dreamweaver. Right in here, I can go ahead and have, say, the target the orientation being in landscape mode, okay? But this is great. I can go beyond the fluid grid layout, and I can add as many different media queries as I want, and you can see that long list here, okay? And this is kind of like a power tip. I feel like I just started and I'm already getting into power tips, but know that fluid grid starts you out with one thing, and you can take it a lot further when it comes to the CSS designer panel and using media queries in there. Okay. What's the most common mobile size? I'm not really sure what the most common mobile size is. I'm sure there's data out there, and I think it's changed a lot over the years. Typically what I do is I personally, and this is just me being from the US, which shame on me, but I think of iPhone and iPad, okay? And so those are the sort of the devices that I target. And what I do is I actually view it on my device using Edge Inspect. So that's how I usually tackle this stuff, okay? So in general, these are the more popular sizes, but again, since this is kind of evolving, this could, these buttons could evolve. Again, 768 by 1024 is the smallest that you'd have for, could be roughly the smallest you have for a tablet device, but okay. All right, and John asks about the get the grid with Bootstrap. You can integrate Bootstrap in here if you want to, but luckily next week, if you don't mind me pointing this out, we do have another event. And on the 15th is Dreamweaver extensions with fluid grid layout and the bootstrap extensions. There's a bootstrap extension, so that's exactly for you, John. So, and yes, you can extend Dreamweaver with extensions. All right. All right, so let's get back into this. Here we are. We have, our initial view. I can click through all of these and see what they're all about. As I roll over these are like smart divs, is what I like to call them. So you can see they have controls here, okay? And in Dreamweaver CS6, again, this is available. But I have more controls since it's enhanced, I have more controls around it. So I can duplicate that div 1. But even for div 1, I even might want to call it my header. Okay, so I can duplicate that header div. Duplicating that, this second one might have an image in it. Okay, and for this second one, again, I might want to rename it, but basically I have 2 divs now, all right? And I can start to duplicate that as well. So this one could be a promo. So I'm starting to quickly sort of mock up what I want to create, okay? And I already have a vision for what I want to create. It was in my slide deck, but I didn't want you guys to go into a coma as I started to go through my slides. So I can drop in imagery, it could be text, you guys get the idea, because all these are divs, so I can drop that in. I can have this promo, I can duplicate that a couple more times. Let's drop in about 4 of them, okay? So these are intelligent divs, but what I'm doing is I've created these different divs, these smart divs, these fluid grid layout divs, and it actually, those divs are available across the different layouts, okay? So when I create items, they'll exist across the different layouts, okay? So this promo 4, if you will, is going to exist across those different layouts, okay? Now, where this gets to be powerful is I can start to look at this, and I can look at the desktop layout, and I can say, okay, this is pretty cool. From here, what I can do is I can start to adjust this, and that's why I added these columns. So now I can scale this first promo down, so it's maybe only 3 columns wide, or 23%. Okay, so I can scale that down, scaling down this second promo, basically adjusting this layout for my desktop view. So I'm scaling down that content. I'm actually changing the CSS for the desktop, all right? If I want to move this one up, oh, you think we can move it up? Oh yeah, there's that button. Hopefully you guys can see that. I can move that up a row, clicking right there. So I can start to move these one right next to the previous one. All right, so you can see how those are laid out. So it's the same content. I've just customized it for desktop. I can see it now in tablet view, and even for tablet view, I can start to change it. Okay, so for the tablet view, again, having control over the layout, I'm changing the CSS, okay, and manipulating it accordingly. Now, a couple things will happen. Like I'll move this up. Maybe you'll move something up. You can move it back down. There's different controls you get as I move this up. I could have this, last promo. This is technically, div, 4 promo is what that is. But I have 2 different promos here. So I can swap this one with the one above it. Even though it looks like it's next to it, you can see that button says swap. And that's how I can move those around, swapping that. And then you guys will start to run into these little things. Like, okay, well, there's this, basically this padding. Okay, so that gutter width that I defined earlier, it's showing it right there. It's like, yes, I would want to get rid of that. And this is where it's intelligent, because from here, I can click to get rid of that padding. Okay, and then I can maybe move that one up. Okay, so there's little controls that appear depending on what you need. Okay, so and just to answer Ben's question about how do you activate the different icons, just make sure you turn on this button right up here. Mouse, hold on one second. Right up here, if you guys can see that. I'm showing different ways to highlight things, but it's that button right there. You guys got to tell me if the zooming is working in these presentations. When I zoom in on things, I'm not sure how that looks for you, but hopefully it's helpful. Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay, so let's take a look at this now, and I'll save all my files, but let's go into split view. Okay, actually, no, hold on one second. Design view, I'm going down to my mobile layout, and here's my mobile layout. Again, I can start to control this. You guys get the idea, but now I have the same content, different layouts across all these different screens, if you will. But if I go into split mode, let's take a look at what's happening behind the scenes, because I'm going to go into this grid CSS. All right, so I'm going into this grid CSS, which is where most of the work is happening. All right, and I can start to take a look at it. Actually, let's just go straight up code view. So there's some sort of general sort of defaults. You can see some notes, and this is exactly what I defined initially when I created my Fluid Grid page. Okay, so these are just my notes that I can check out. There's a couple of articles, which is cool, on the grid system, different things like that. But then what we get into, so those are like your defaults, okay, and other resources. But then we get into the mobile layout. So it actually applies this mobile layout first, or applies the CSS. So it says, hey, by default, thinking mobile first, apply all of these properties. So that's what happens. So if I go to split view, it's applying all of these properties. As I scroll down, it's saying, hey, if it's the tablet layout, which means minimum width 481 or higher, then, again, clicking here, then put, the second promo next to the first. So basically what's happening is I've adjusted the width of each one of those divs. Okay, so they're about 48% wide, each one of them. Okay, scrolling down, you'll see the last one, which is the desktop. Okay, so if it's larger than 780, then start applying these CSS properties. You guys are probably wondering, 780 isn't really desktop? Yeah, you might be right. It actually might be more like tablet, okay? And the nice thing is I can always change this if I want to. I could either change this, I could make this 900 if I want to. But if I do that, just keep in mind, this button's always going to default to 768. Or excuse me. Let's just change that to 768. Here we go. Minimum width, that's actually the, yeah, the desktop layout will go from 768 to 1200. The short of it is I'm saying that the desktop layout and tablet layouts tend to overlap each other a lot. And there's basically a lot of overlap when it comes to these different sizes, okay? And that's why what people will usually say is let your content dictate sort of what size you'd have your content at, or where your breakpoints would be. Okay, so if you decide you need another media query for whatever reason, you can add that in, and I can show you how to do that in a second. But let's just go back down. You can see all the CSS right down here, and let's take a look at this a little closer as I start to make changes so you can see that code change behind the scenes. In fact, one tricky one people will run into is like maybe this promo div 4 Okay, well, where is that? Is that really div 4? Let's take a look at it. That's my div 4. Maybe I don't want to show it on mobile because it's just too much content. Okay, so this is a bunch of banner ads or who knows what. I don't want to delete it, but I can always hide it. So I'll hide div 4. Okay, and what happens is it changes the display to none. Okay, so you'll start to look in here and you'll be like, wait a minute, how do I bring it back? Okay, and the goal there is you can always change that a couple of ways. In fact, you can just type it right in there, or you can use the display property in the CSS designer panel. But in general, I can change the display to block or just get rid of it entirely. So I roughly have to manually bring it back by getting rid of the display none to bring it back. Okay. So, but I am showing you the uh, all right, so I'm just kind of reading through some of the questions. Some people mentioning 769, basically 780. And again, that's just a property that's actually defined right in here, as you guys saw, for your desktop layout. Okay. But really, it shouldn't be 769 to a max of 1232 because there's no max width property in here, no max width media query. Okay? So, yeah, that's kind of how that's set up. I'm going to spend about 5 more minutes on the fluid grid properties. And then we're going to go beyond that because it sounds like people are asking questions around responsive design that goes beyond the fluid grid layout. So, and keep in mind, fluid grids, how this is being broken down is anytime I hit this duplicate button and I make a new one, so this is actually div 6. What this does, since this is a fluid grid div, if you will, is it made this div 6 here, okay? So it made it here. It made it in the tablet media query, and then it made it in the mobile media query, okay? So that's the power of using fluid grid layouts, is that I duplicate it or I create some different screens, okay? So that's why, again, to kind of blow your mind, you could start to look, again, I'm just going to use this as a different view. If I actually look at the CSS, this is just another way to look at it. I have div 6 here for mobile, div 6 here, and then div 6 right down here. Okay, so those are my 3 different CSS definitions, or selectors to those definitions in these different media queries. Okay. But it's nice that anytime I change a property in design view, it actually changes that media query. All right. Okay. Actually, no. Craig, let me answer your question about, so that's what's going on with these IDs. Let's go beyond this if I could. Thank you for bringing that up, by the way. Let's see, if I take a look, and let's see. Let's just take a look at something else we can do in here. Because what you have, if I go into the Insert panel and I want to insert something else, let's say, I don't know what we want to, insert. Let's just insert a common div, okay? Or, in fact, you said a different HTML element. Let's go into structure. Here we go. So this is HTML5. Let's insert a header, for instance. Okay, so as I select header, this is where I can pick my class. Okay, so I don't have any classes. Okay, but it will insert it as a fluid element. So I can do, class, creating class, my class, which is what I just created. And then I can take a look at the CSS that was just implemented. So I can see there's my class. Since I've checked that box, it actually gives me that property across all 3 different media queries. Okay? So again, that's what I've added. And I did that by just inserting an HTML5 element and checking that box. Again, I'll zoom in on Mac to answer that other question. It's a property in system preferences. You can add this zoom. But I can insert any element as a fluid element, and it gives me that CSS across all 3 different media queries. All right, so to answer your question, the answer is yes. All right. All right, so all right, so that's inserting additional elements, HTML elements. You don't have to just insert divs, but it could be any HTML structure element, common elements. Insert HTML5 video, that's kind of a different story. That's a whole nother item that I can drop in, which I just did, but that's actually not sort of a structure element. So you're better off going to the different structure HTML5 elements since media queries deal with the structure of a web page. And you can, SK Webbies, you can rename your divs too. And I did that initially for this top one. I renamed this one to header, okay? So I can jump in and start to rename some of those others as well, okay? Change this to promo. That should be promo 1. So it'd be wise to not do as I do, but do as I say, which would be to name your IDs as you create them. Name your divs as you create them. All right. Okay, so let's move on. So what I can do is I can start to, again, structure this accordingly. I can toggle it on and off just to see its view, so I can check it out that way. And I can even turn off those dotted lines too. But really, what do I want to do? Actually, this is another thing I can do is I can start to change the properties of these different items. Okay, so if I jump in here, for this promo, I can change the background color or give it a background color, all using the CSS Designer panel. Okay, so I just changed that property, and it, of course, cascades down. Since we're thinking mobile first, that's what I want to do, is I want to sort of I end up working in the mobile view, adding those properties. Let's just change that a shade. Coming in here, again, I should have named this appropriately, but I'm adding properties to each one of these promos, all using the Fluid Grid layout. Trying to keep some sort of color scheme that's somewhat pleasing. I don't know if I'm very successful, but this just makes it easier to see what I'm about to do. All right, So that's pretty good. I have all my colors. I've established them. I can preview it in a browser. Here it is. Again, div 6 I added at the very last minute, so I kind of got it a little bit screwed up. But if I jump in there, I can always remove that. In fact, you do need to be aware that when you're adding and removing elements, I can remove it. It's going to remove all of the various, the CSS and everything. All right, now that I've cleaned up my page after answering some of those questions, I can preview it in Chrome. And you can see there's my 4, desktop, go down to tablet, down to mobile. All right? And that's how that works. I can also hit live view and see how that looks again by just without previewing it in a browser. I can click through. Okay, so let's move on because I'm not particularly fond of this particular layout. And what I want to do is I want to get into some additional capabilities that you can do with Fluid Grid Layout. And quite frankly, here is a layout. This layout was created with the Fluid Grid layout as a starting point. Okay? In fact, you can see these elements right in here. These share all the same class, okay? Just so you know. But I could jump in here and I can start to sort these differently. I can move the jackets on the other side of wetsuits, for instance. Okay, so I've just swapped those. Start to move jackets clear to the end if I want to. So I'm basically moving that one up in the DOM is what I was doing. All right, so there's my jackets. I can start to sort. There's additional things I can do. Again, as far as CSS goes, but you can still see this one has the same media queries. As I click each one of these, you can see how this content changes. In fact, as I go into live view, you can see it render. I can go from the initial layout, give it a second to render, to the tablet layout, clear up to the desktop layout. So I just wanted to show you an example that was done with Fluid Grid layouts. Yeah. Someone asks if you have multiple divs going across, like the one I'm playing with, is there a way to resize them all at the same time to make them fit? Thank you for mentioning that because I actually can. Since they all inherit the same class, if I take, let's just turn this back on. If I take any one of these, they all inherit the same class. So hold on one second. So I can resize any one of these objects, and it will resize all 6 is what happens. So let's just give this a second. It's processing. It's like, oh, I'm getting tired of my computer went for a cup of coffee. But since it's inheriting a class, that's how this is associated, I can scale this down. Say, let's go down to like 1 column. It scales all of them down to 1 column because they all all inherit the same class. All right. So that's how that works. I'm going to bring it back here in a second as well. Yeah, that's kind of what you want to do. Kind of answering some more questions. Why does CC never display backgrounds? I think you might have to be a little more specific there, because it displays backgrounds for me. So The names of these products in this case is text. Yeah, so that was another question. Let me scale this back up. Let's just double check that. Yeah, it's text. Yeah, so the question is asked if they share the same class, where in the CSS Designer do you see that? And I must have accidentally deleted one. Oh, there it is. There, it's back. Okay, sorry, I got this. This is a little funky. But nonetheless, when I select any item, it gives me the computed, okay? So I'd have to start to look at all the different properties that make up this particular element. So I'm just going to select Design View, or excuse me, Live View, and I'm going to start to inspect this content. So I can select it. This gives me all the computed properties. I would have to start to look for the width is what I would do for each one of those items, and look where it says the percentage. But it would be one of these. The computed just gives me the total, okay? So I'd have to start to go through some of these properties, and I think it's actually navlink icon, okay? That's actually the icon which gives me that width of 70 pixels, okay? So if I select this next one, I can see that one has navlink icon right there as well. 70 pixels. So it's kind of being familiar with your CSS is how you can tell that it has that inherited property. But the cool thing is, inherited or not, it really doesn't matter when it comes to the CSS Designer, because it gives you all the computed properties. So if I, again, decide I want to, round the corners of all of this object, it's going to round them of all the objects because it's applying it to all the objects. In fact, there's navlink icon. Okay, they're all part of the same CSS class, not an individual class, because that's how this file is set up. Okay. Mike, the 70 pixels will not scale as it resizes. It won't. There's a certain breakpoint in there that's set at 70 pixels. What does scale is the div. So I think actually the icon size stays the same, but the padding around it actually changes. Okay, that's where the percentage should be. So as I scroll down, you can see the padding is at 10%, so that will actually scale. All right, cool. All right, so let's move on. Let's take a look at this some more. In fact, what I wanted to do is kind of go beyond fluid grid layouts, and I wanted to go File, New, and I'll just create a blank page, okay? And I could even start with one of these layouts if I want to. And sure, I could do that. I can hit Create, and again, just to make this easy, that's what I will do. Throw it in this folder, saving this file. And I just wanted to show you could take any file that you have, because chances are you probably have a website already, and you're not going from File, New, okay? So you can add media queries to any page, again, using the CSS Designer panel. You do have to select your source, okay? So you'd sort of establish a new CSS page, okay? Just like that, my styled CSS, and that's where I'll add a media query using the CSS Designer panel. So minimum width, let's do 600 pixels. Okay. And then selecting, okay, so we have our global minimum width, and then you start stacking them however you want. Minimum width is, 1,000. Okay. So essentially what I kind of started to create here was my own responsive site, and I can start putting in different CSS properties in each one of these. So let's save this. I can see all of this CSS, and I can start to add overrides to any one of these. Let's take a look. My container, for instance. Okay, so I'll go to the code for that particular container and start to change it. Okay, so this container is at a fixed width. First of all, maybe I want to change that to 100%. And I can start to see how that looks. So I can take that down to desktop and start to see some of this breakdown in content. But I can start to, first of all, just like I said when I started out, change my fixed position, fixed width items to percentages, okay? And then start to see where my design breaks down. So already I'm noticing that this design does break down. Even if I started to scale it down this way, sort of scaling down the page, I'd start to see where it breaks down. Scaling it down, and immediately you can tell that I already have a fixed width position item right here as well. So this content is set to 780 pixels. So again, let's make that 100% or 90% or whatever. Okay, let's actually make it less, because that's not going to work 100%. But again, I'm just following that process of changing pixels to percentages, and I can start to see how that scales down. And honestly, maybe about at this point right here, I'm noticing this column is starting to get too thin. About 630 pixels, if you will, which is exactly where I put this screen, that media query. So at this point, that's where I want to start adding the CSS properties to override, if you will, what I established initially. Okay? So that's what I'd want to do, start adding those particular properties that way. So for instance, like this, even this column, I don't like this aside, which is set to 180 pixels. Okay, and maybe I don't want to float it. Well, again, let's go to, again, that's called sidebar 1. I can go to that code. I'd usually copy that and then paste that right in here. So the screen for sidebar 1, well, let's make that 100% and change the float to none. All right, so that's what I did at 600 pixels wide. Okay. So you can see how that's actually kind of screwed up at this point. I probably want to reverse these two, so let's copy this. Float this right, make this 180 pixels, and then since this is doing a mobile first approach, I have to change this to float none and change the width to 100%. Okay, because it does a mobile first approach. How do I know that? Because in code view, I have the CSS that cascades down, and then it applies that property at that size. So going back into design view, looks good. As I scale it down, and as it goes down to, again, to that 600 pixel width, you can see this is at the top, 100% pixels wide. So, all right, so let's go ahead and let's wrap this up, guys. I started to get into how to develop from scratch a responsive site when, to be honest with you, there's plenty of resources out there on how to do this sort of thing. So just to, shamelessly I guess, plug some additional content. You know, let's not forget about our edge tools and services. We have reflow and different things like that. We have reflow. We have edge inspect that we need to think about. But also I wanted to point out that I actually developed a course for lynda.com that goes through how to make a responsive site with Dreamweaver CC. Okay, so that's on lynda.com, Dreamweaver CC features and updates. I go through that exact. Explain it pretty well in that course. So again, that's just a shameless plug. Lastly, apologize for me clicking around a lot, but I did want to get back to some new things that we're going to be working on, which is we're keeping an eye out for emerging technologies as well and developing for the modern web. So I don't want you to forget about Edge Reflow, CSS region, and then just keep an eye on flexible box layout, which is a spec that's actually been around for a while, been modified some, but makes it really easy to make a flexible layout. So I encourage you to look at those three things as we are, and we're doing some development on some of those things. All right. The way, got derailed at times, but it's important to make this valuable for you guys. Thank you for posting various links, which seem really helpful, as well as the archives where this will be recorded. Like I said, this presentation, these resource slides, I actually posted by Twitter, and of course my Twitter handle is @PaulTrani. And aside from that, I'm actually setting up an additional resource page that I've added content to. So if you go to Paul CSS fonts and just different things. So that page that I just sent out is an ongoing resource page that I'm going to continually update. So you don't have to worry about keeping track of tweets. You can also go to that page. Okay. Brian, there are some Flexbox issues with some browsers, like older browsers, and it's kind of been developed by like Mozilla started it, and I know there's an issue with IE8 versus IE10, so basically Flexbox has been updated recently to take care of some of these issues. So you are correct. Thank you for pointing that out. But again, we're working on that stuff, keeping an eye on it. And I know as soon as we finish this meeting, I'm going to think of more things that I needed to tell you, especially around, say, Edge Inspect. I encourage you to look at that. And just really appreciate you guys. So let's keep the conversation open. I'll stay in the Q&A pod, but I'm going to end the audio portion as well as the recording with a big thank you, and we'll definitely see you guys online. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone, for coming and helping spread the word. I'll get the recording up here maybe in 20 minutes, half hour. Have a good day.